Welcome to our NHD Quick Tips series. In this episode, we're going to focus on a judge's guide to the NHD evaluation form. It's important that all of our judges know that the NHD evaluation forms were reformatted starting with the 2021 contest year. The purpose of the reformat is to help students get feedback on all of the 10 criteria. While the evaluation forms vary slightly from category to category, all of the evaluation forms carry the weight that historical quality is worth 80% and clarity of presentation is worth 20%. The evaluation builds from the right to the left. Based on the stated criteria, if there is no evidence or barely any evidence, that's where you check that not evident column. There's just nothing there to go on. It builds as you go further to the left, as students demonstrate their mastery of this particular segment in an increasing and improving way. It's important to understand that the evaluation form is qualitative or holistic in nature. You want to decide where a project best fits, and it's important that you give students evidence in your comments to support that. If you say that their historical context fit in the good category, give them some suggestions on how they can improve that. It's important that when you look for evidence, you look at the project as a whole. So that's the project itself, the process paper, and the annotated bibliography. In some cases, some of the rows have 2 checkboxes. When that's the case, it's okay to split, to say that the first row is excellent, but the second piece is only good. If you do that, again, explain that to students, help them understand what they did and how they can do better. If you find yourself as a judging team struggling between 2 different columns, that's a good clue that that's a good place to provide a comment or some feedback. So for the purposes of our video, we want to provide a simple example. We are going to focus just on the historical argument and primary sources rows of the evaluation form. And we're going to look at some samples and say, okay, how do we know whether the student's project fits into superior, excellent, good, fair, or not evident? Let's assume for this purpose, I'm building an NHD exhibit board connected to the 2021 Communication and History, the Key to Understanding theme. And we're going to do a very, very simplified version of this board. We're going to focus just on the argument and 1 primary source panel with the assumption that there's others on the board that look like this. Now, sometimes you get a project when you start off, especially maybe at a regional level or a school level, where there's not much on it. There might be a title, there might be some primary or secondary sources thrown on there, but there's really not much more than that. Sometimes that argument just is not there. So you want to ask yourself as a judge these 3 questions. Is there an argument there? Does the project connect to the NHD theme? And does the project use primary sources? And if it does, how? So if I look at this board, there's just not a whole lot here, right? I don't really see an argument because the student didn't try to put one down. And there's primary sources, but there's not really an argument, so there's not really a clear connection. In this case, we would check not evident for the argument, and probably fair for primary sources. They're there, but we're not really sure why they're there or what they're doing there. So if a student gets this feedback, and again, it's an early phase of the project, he or she could go back and go like, all right, I got it. I got to have an argument and I've got to connect my primary sources. I need some text to go with them. So they might go back and say, okay, now they bring to you the second version. Now they've got a starter for an argument. The student says civil rights leaders from the 1930s to 1960s use music to communicate a message. And they've got a caption with Marian Anderson communicating her message at the Lincoln Memorial in 1939, crediting the Library of Congress. Okay, let's ask some questions. Is there an argument? There's a starter argument here, right? Does the project connect to the theme? Well, they've got communication, we'll come back to that. And is the project using primary sources? Okay, so let's evaluate this argument for a second. Does it state the topic? Civil rights leaders use music. Okay, set time parameters, check. Clear connection to the theme. Well, they say communication, but I'm not really sure how they're communicating, why they're communicating, what kind of an impact that had. But there's an attempt there, but it's not real strong. And is it an argument or a statement of fact? Music was used to communicate a message. That's landed much more in that factual category than that argument category. But the students made an attempt. So now what we want to do is take a look back to our evaluation form. There's an argument there, it's pretty weak. There's not a whole lot of analysis. I'm not really sure where they're going to go with this. The theme is mentioned, and the primary sources there are pretty much just illustrating, because it said, well, Mary Anderson's communicating while she's singing. So it's there, but I'm not really seeing how it's pushing the argument or really providing solid evidence. What is it about what she was singing, how she was singing, to whom she was singing, or what was the impact of her famous concert? Okay, student gets feedback and is like, all right, I got it this time. I'm coming back to you with a revised version. Civil rights leaders from the 1930s to 1960s used music to raise awareness and communicate to the broader public. They sang to demand attention for their cause at various levels. Now, that primary source says that Marian Anderson's concert, broadcast on the radio, gained a broader audience for civil rights causes when she mixed opera with African American spirituals. She used music's power to communicate the need for change on the national level with influential political leaders. Oh, now this is getting more interesting, right? We can see the growth and the improvement. Yeah, look at the argument. Now the student's not only saying that the leaders use music, but how to raise awareness and communicate to the public. They sang to demand attention for their cause. Okay, so that's a little bit of a deeper understanding. We've got the time parameters. We've got the idea of communicating out to get attention. I'm not really sure about the understanding of the back end of that, but we're getting closer. And is it an argument? Now we're getting closer, because we're not just saying that they sung, but they're saying why, and that's demanding attention. Okay, so now if I'm evaluating this project, we're moving up towards that excellent category. There's an argument with analysis, and that theme is being addressed, not just dropped in, but addressed throughout. The primary sources are starting to support the argument. They're there for a reason. Okay, students like, all right, I got this. We're moving to superior. Let's go. New argument. Leaders of the civil rights movement from the 1930s to the 1960s used music to communicate their goals to the American public. Music helped to bring awareness to the movement, draw in young activists from diverse backgrounds, and communicate ideas that the American public did not always want to hear. Ooh, now this is interesting, because now we're stating the topic and the time parameters. We're communicating the theme and understanding that communication is two ways, right? It's not just about communicating a message out, but then how it is received. The American public didn't want to hear it. Is this an argument? Yes. This is something we can disagree with. We can provide an alternate interpretation. Now let's look at how the primary source is used. When Marian Anderson sang "Nobody Knows the Troubles I've Seen," it communicated the message of the civil rights movement to a national audience who was often not receptive. Now we're making those clear connections. This is pushing into that superior column. We're talking about a well-formulated argument with thorough analysis. The theme would be woven throughout the project in different ways, not just dropping the word communication into every other sentence. And the primary sources develop the argument. Now, obviously, this is a super simplified version where we're looking at one piece of evidence in the argument. Obviously, to be in the superior column, you've got to be doing this throughout your project. Remember that what we're showing you here is simply a snapshot. In order for that historical argument to be superior, it would really have to be developed. We would expect to see evidence in the project to support the claim that the Americans weren't receptive. So maybe the student has included some polling data of how Americans reacted or what they had to say after that concert. We would also expect the students to provide that historical context, right? Why did this concert happen in the first place? And the significance. So what? Why did that concert matter? Another way to think of it: argument, reasoning, evidence. What's the argument the student's making? What's the reasoning or the why that they're explaining? And how are they using that evidence? The goal that we're trying to do is to help our students go from illustrating with evidence to supporting with evidence to developing with evidence. And again, this is holistic. You need to look at a project and evaluate where that project best fits on any one given day in the state of revision. Two quick reminders here. The first is the idea of student voice. It's very important that we hear the students' originality of thought. That means when they start off, especially when they get in their beginning and their conclusion, we want to hear from them. We don't want them relying on primary or secondary sources to tell the story for them. We don't want to know what a historian feels about their topic. We want to know what the student thinks about that topic. Key phrase here though, student voice. Remember, these are students. They do not need to have a revelation or a historical find that no one's found before to make it superior. A student articulating an argument clearly can get to superior, even if it's something that we've heard of before. Finally, rules compliance. It's really important that judge teams sit down and agree on any rules compliance issues. The checkbox is either yes in compliance or no not in compliance need to be consistent across all judges. If there is a rules issue, it is important that you define exactly what it is. So for example, the media ran over by an extra 2 minutes, and in your comments, flesh out what the students can do to improve that. If you have questions on rules compliance, please speak to your contest coordinator before submitting your judge sheets. In the end, we want to say thank you for investing your time in our NHD students and judging their projects. If you have questions, please go to nhd.org to learn more. Thank you, and thanks for judging.